You're watching Moto Therapy. This is a channel that focuses on the therapeutic benefits of riding motorcycles. And it starts out in Bisbee, Arizona, which is an old mining town in Arizona. It's at a fairly high altitude. It's above 5,000 feet. And it's during the monsoon season, so it's in the summer, but you're seeing actual rain and rain on the camera as monsoon rain is just getting going in the afternoon in Bisbee. And I'm leaving a coffee shop in downtown Bisbee, and I'm getting ready to ride. And I'm backing my motorcycle up, and you're going to see various water drops on my camera as I do so. But I want to focus today on optic flow and how that might be related to EMDR. Before I get into that, just so you know what you're looking at, this city of Bisbee, Arizona it's an old mining town. It's been kept very much the way it looked in, say, the 1900s, 1910, intentionally. And it's somewhat of a tourist spot for people to come and visit the mine, which is called the Copper Queen, and go on the mining tour. But also there's a museum with all kinds of mining equipment and various art galleries and people selling art, etc., and lots of restaurants. So it's somewhat of a tourist destination. And you'll see me driving through downtown Bisbee. Now, the speed limit is 25, and in a few places it's 15. So the folks who are saying, hey, why are you going so slow? Because I'm obeying the speed limit. And there's a lot of pedestrians that cross the street or on the side of the street. So the speed limits are really set for them so that we don't have too many accidents. But it's a beautiful old city. It's been kept the way that it's been kept intentionally. And it's a great spot to visit and spend a little time. So I want to go into the process that you experience while riding a motorcycle, which is this sort of hyper focus on everything around you as it's coming up to you. And I talked a bit in my previous video about optic flow and how Dr. Shane Amara is a huge proponent of walking, and how he talks about the importance of seeing objects in your visual field and walking by them. And the interesting thing is that process may be accentuated by riding motorcycles, and there's a growing body of research that riding motorcycles can create relaxation and reduce stress and even biomarkers of stress. So it's important to understand optic flow. Anyway, going back into my personal background, so I worked for over 30 years as a psychologist, a clinical psychologist, and a clinical neuropsychologist, and ultimately an operational psychologist. And I'm not going to get into what all that means in this video, but when I was a graduate student in psychology in California, I was lucky enough to go to a graduate school that had a relationship with Dr. Francine Shapiro. And Dr. Shapiro discovered or created eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And she had a relationship with our graduate program where I think she charged half or a third or a quarter of what the typical training fee was to become certified in EMDR. And I went to her certification and then the advanced one. I actually went several times. It's so long ago, I can't remember if I just went twice or 3 times or 4 times. But I was very impressed with what she was doing. And because I was a graduate student, I think it was like a third or a quarter of what the normal tuition would be to attend her workshop. And so I got a lot of training from Dr. Shapiro in person, but also she had, of course, several trainers. And the part that I think is most important, so EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. I think the part that's important to understand is she would tell the story every time about how she discovered this. And she would talk about she was walking through a park and a particularly traumatic memory came into her mind. And she was looking at trees and rocks and various things in the park. And she noticed the more she looked around and back and forth, especially left and right, back and forth, she started feeling better. And so as she walked through the park, she began accentuating that process of trying to look back and forth as much as possible. And she noticed that she was feeling better and better as this unfolded. Now, I think that's a very interesting observation. It's also very much in line with Dr. Shana Mara's research, right? That she's actually saying almost the identical thing that Shana Mara is saying about the curative factors of walking. The therapy that she developed was not that. The therapy that she developed was sitting in an office with a psychologist, and they kind of evaluate you. You spend obviously a couple of sessions just getting through talking about what traumas you might have and what you want to work on, and then you're conjuring up these memories. And so after you bring these memories into focus, the therapist has you look back and forth, left and right, fairly rapidly by following their fingers. So they're moving their hand with two fingers in front of you, and you're supposed to follow and look left and right very rapidly. And that is part of the therapy process that she developed. Now, it is one of three accepted treatments for post-traumatic stress disorder, the other two being prolonged exposure and cognitive processing therapy. But it's unique in this eye movement process that she has included in the therapy. The interesting thing is when she told me that, she told all of us that story, not just me, but when she told me and everyone else, I'm thinking in my head, why don't we just have people walk through the woods and look back and forth at like trees and rocks and whatever, hills, mountains. And obviously, probably the reason we don't do that as psychologists is that's not really the model. The model is somebody coming into the office, and so the therapy is really designed around the office setting. But in that way, we may actually be limiting the effect of these eye movements because it's not the same if you're sitting in a chair and you're moving your eyes back and forth. I do think there's probably something going on there that's part of this optic flow process, but it may not be as powerful as if you actually were walking through space and looking back and forth at things. So I think Dr. Shapiro uncovered something really interesting. I'm not sure she actually knew why it worked, and she sometimes would say that maybe the mechanism was something similar to REM sleep, because people, when they're in REM sleep, they look back and forth with their eyes closed. And unfortunately, that explanation that she had come up with wasn't helpful because it's quite obvious you're not in REM sleep when you're in a therapist's office, and you're anything but asleep when you're trying to conjure up whatever the worst memory of your life is. So I don't think that's a great explanation. I don't think it actually helped propagating EMDR, but I do think she discovered something that we might be able to accentuate or even improve by just accelerating the process. And I do mean accelerating by moving through space and looking at things in the horizon and approaching them. And this may be the main curative factor that we're seeing with people who ride motorcycles. And there's something about looking through space and looking at these objects coming by you, and even at relatively slow speeds, there's something about it that seems to really result in relaxation, especially after you're done riding. In this video, I'm going really relatively slow for most of the video. This is almost all 25 mile an hour zone. I leave the downtown part, but as you'll see, there's all these 15 signs and 25 mile an hour signs that as I'm riding, and I'm trying to stay within the limits of the speed limit here. But there's something even curative, even at these relatively low speeds. I'm not sure you have to be blasting down the interstate to achieve this, but there's something very powerful about it. To give you a sense of how impressed I was with Francine Shapiro, I had actually put together a dissertation proposal to collect data on her treatment and use that as my dissertation. And I gave it to Francine, and she reviewed it. And she was basically very open to having me do a dissertation with her. However, she sat me down and talked about all the challenges of data collection and how long it might take to get enough data to finish my dissertation, which I appreciated tremendously. At the time, I was actually working as like a psych tech at Kaiser Permanente and getting paid to do research on a depression study that involved group therapy for depression. And I realized that I might be able to get permission to just use the data that I was collecting anyway for my job. It was like my side job in graduate school. And I did that. That decision was probably more out of expediency than anything else, because I was able to skip over the part of like having to get all this human subjects review, because I was basically dovetailing my dissertation on an existing human subjects study. But it was an incredibly so to sum this up, Francine discovered something very interesting, and I think in retrospect she came very close to unlocking a really powerful treatment for traumatic events. Although the treatment she created is well respected, there's a potential to even go farther with this once we understand what's going on with optic flow. That's all I've got for this video.